the amount you get accomplished when you're listening to scholarship surprised me.
Do you know, I've actually never actually done that. More about
All right.
So I'm waiting for the code and microformats. The party, the first part of the party, the second part,
Yeah.
and all of the necessary
Just
contractual
send it
documents.
from It's like 20 minutes, you one bus ride from here. It's here, towards, more towards.
All right, we made it to the end of the first day of IndieWebCamp. Thanks everybody for sticking with all the way. So yeah, I think that was a bunch of amazing sessions, and I wanted to try something new this year that we have not yet done at an IndieWebCamp. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this schedule grid, and we're going to go through each session, and we're going to start at the top, and somebody who is in that session will stand up and give a 1-minute, few sentence summary about what was discussed at the session. Any like good insights that came out of it, or what you talked about. Did you come up with anything interesting? Was there just a bunch of frustrations and nothing was solved? Whatever happened in the session is just say something about it. But that way we will all get a little sense of what happened at the sessions we were not able to go to because we can't all be in 3 places at once. 4 places at once in 2 cases. So let's start. Let's start with pagination. Who was at the pagination session that can say something? If the session leader would like to say something, that would be the most appropriate, probably. Otherwise, feel free to, anybody can speak up. Pagination.
I can summarize it.
Great. And you don't actually have to come up here, but I do want you to hold this.
So the very short summary we went away with pagination is that the most sensible way to paginate is that it should align with the way you align your stream. If it's date-based, then you most probably want to have date-based archives as your pagination elements. Monthly, daily, weekly, something like that, instead of just random numbers that are split up. And the other good takeaway is that a reverse order, even if you just do numbers, makes more sense, because in that case page number 1 will be page number 1 for all eternity, instead of constantly shifting away.
Great. Any for WordPress?
So it would be the leader who was best. Nobody else wants to volunteer? If you'd like. Because I have to talk 3 times then.
Yeah, in the WordPress session was mostly David showing how you take an empty WordPress site and add the plugins and what nice features you get with all the plugins and how easy it is to get a more or less fully featured indie website from a WordPress site through all the plugins.
Excellent. Social e-readers.
So that we basically went over the beginning steps of how to do social e-readers and how to implement them and what they're used for. Just how you're able to integrate all these different social, networks onto one platform, and the benefits of that.
Well, we discussed the benefits of having something that is not a password for your website, both in the terms of replacing password as the first and single-factor authentication, or potentially using it as second-factor authentication. Specifically, we spoke about hardware tokens, such as the ones from YubiKey, also in contrast to software tokens, which might be used to wrap other means of software-based authentication, or potentially bridge other hardware-based authentications. We discussed different approaches, for example, modifying self-auth, or benefiting price, which is a fork of self-auth, Marty. Hint. Tomorrow during the sessions. Yes. Okay.
Self-hosting. So that session.
Hi, that was a fairly empty session, unfortunately. Basically, it was an introduction to the Cloudron service, which provides a good number of facilities for self-hosting. Is Alexander here?
The name of the hoster.
Cloudron. Dot. Yeah. I'm now passing the buck to the next session.
Thank you. Digital archiving.
I am not passing the buck to the next session.
I was in that session. So it was split into 5, which sort of bits, and I can't remember what they were now. How to store stuff, how to archive stuff, which is kind of about categorization or tagging, how to retrieve stuff. Yeah, it started with a lot of stuff about different media and file formats and a bit about licensing, and ended with. Yes, we ended with we came to the conclusion that all browsers are missing a trick because we've all got these personal archives in our browser histories, and it could be presented way more nicely and beautifully and interestingly than it currently is.
It was very nice, like Star Wars thing. This was based on a complaint from me about the implementation of microformats versus namespace CSS, stylistic CSS that's quite often used, prefix with a single letter, dash, whatever. We had some discussions over that, discussed a few different alternative ways that we could do microformats. Talked about maybe doing it as a JSON endpoint or embedding JSON in the page, using data components, attributes, and all of those were dismissed for various technical reasons, such as validation and repetition of work and violating dry principles. But we did actually come up with a solution at the end, which was to use the property attribute in HTML as an alternative to using class, and to put the attributes inside there to avoid these namespace collisions. And in fact, Aaron, during the course of this, kindly wrote a PR for this to achieve it in the parser. And I think this might very well end up in the microformat specification, with hope. Yes.
Displaying responses.
Yeah, we looked at a number of different examples of where you might get responses either from a web mention or directly from a site or indirectly via bridgey backfeed, like from a Twitter response, where like the contents might be something like just noise or maybe like bad commentary or something like that. And we came up with one possible approach, which is to sort of segment the sets of web sources of web mentions you might received into kind of an accept list, or AKA trusted sources, however you come up with that, maybe sites you follow, friends, whatever. And then a second degree of trust, which is kind of the problem that Vouch tries to solve, and then everyone else. And then potentially for each one of those sets of sources, display different pieces of information. So maybe you only display like someone's URL if they're completely untrusted, or if you second degree of trust, show their icon and maybe their name. Or if they're in your accept list, maybe you show the full comment of what they said as a way to at least automatically show something without necessarily exposing yourself to all the abuse that you might get automatically. That, the IndieWeb can do a better job than what silos do.
Let's build a microweb endpoint session was mine. So in that session, it was a live coding session, and I built a microweb endpoint from scratch along with a little tiny blogging engine that could display posts and post with photos. We built a microweb endpoint and also added the media endpoint to that, and finished 5 minutes before the end of the session. So that was fun. Data ethics on the IndieWeb.
I think the proper hashtag would have been can of worms. We tried to have a strictly ethical and not legal discussion about all the content we pull into our sites that are owned by others. I think there's some overlap, obviously, with the session about the displaying. We came up with a list of 6 starting points that could be discussed. Like vouch would be one, where we could maybe infer some level of permission for publishing or dealing with that data. Generally, machine-readable formatting of some kind of permission or license. We talked about license, particularly. Would that be something? We talked about meta tags, no index, no archive style, somehow to indicate preferences for how you want to be quoted by other sites. We talked about something like robots.txt. Would that be kind of an approach? And we talked about whether the presence of an O-embed mechanism could be interpreted as a sign for permission to publish more of a response than from other sites. We kind of agreed that it's a wicked problem. We didn't really find a solution. We more opened a space of questions. There were some ideas about could there be a score, could there be a rating of how many of these signals are present, for example, but then there's also pretty quickly then the risk that we go into kind of creating an indie algorithm, and then that's yet another can of worms. So.
This community is just full of cans of worms. We keep opening.
Okay, photos and galleries.
Yeah, I can.
You? Oh,
Yeah, I think one of the core things we talked about was like really what makes a photo gallery, because like many people post photos, but it's mostly posting individual photos, and we talked about how it is different, for instance, from how people use images on Flickr, where it's often like archives of large groups of photos. And then there's kind of like a gallery in the real world is a white box with curated photos, and it's kind of that then similar to, so for instance, like the difference between like just a list of photo posts and an image gallery on the web could be that it has a custom order, has maybe specially changed presentations. Some pictures are bigger than others, something like that in a grid view. And of course, like a view that's optimized for viewing images and not for view, and maybe not showing so much metadata in the way. And then should a gallery be its own kind of post type in a way, or should it just be a collection of images like a tag overview page? And then we also, because as mentioned a few times, Flickr has changed its terms of services and is going to limit free accounts. We also looked into how are people using Flickr and what can we build out of the building blocks to replicate some of that. For instance, people use Flickr to discover images taken at events by others. Can we make like IndieWeb aggregators for images, or an IndieWeb image search engine? And we're gonna play with a few of these things.
Cool. Micro post, pause and repeat.
Yeah, we were with 3, so we just talked about what we did to we were talking about our workflows of posting stuff on our own website with Bussy and all the things. Showed off a bit of how we did it, and yeah, that was it.
Well, there was that one thing, using syndication targets in micropub for triggering services for properties that are not supported in any given client. That was sort of an interesting idea.
Cool. Building a censorship-resistant web. That was Dietrich, right?
Yes.
Good.
I would love to hear an alternative perspective of someone who's present.
Challenge anyone there?
Don't self-censor, come on.
If he doesn't.
I was there, and I did find it interesting and thought-provoking. The number of protocols were discussed, such as IPFS, DAT, and also the Beaker browser, and a number of other things. I think the conclusion at the end was there are now some protocols and mechanisms in place to make it possible to distribute material that is very resistant to censorship, but there is nothing yet in place to allow preservation of the identity of the author, which is in itself obviously makes the whole thing a bit cold. But I'm now going to pass to Dieter to make a sensible comment.
No, that was great.
Okay. Making your website work offline.
Thank you. We talked about the technical side of this, which involved service workers. So I was trying to give an explanation of what a service worker is, which is tricky because they're weird. But more importantly, we started to go through the use cases and kind of patterns, the different recipes you could implement to make a nice user experience for people coming to your website. If the site's offline, what do you show them? That kind of stuff. What came out of it was actually the importance of not so much making your site work when there's no internet connection, but making your site work when there's a shitty internet connection, which is more common and actually maybe trickier to deal with. And I may end up working on that tomorrow. So that's different recipes and approaches for what you could do to make a nice experience for when the website's down or the user's got no internet connection.
Services for websites.
We mostly went through the existing services that are listed on the wiki and some of them which are not listed on the wiki yet or not in the way they should be. One of my personal conclusions is that I would really like to add some wiki pages that would summarize the how to enhance your existing site with services instead of trying to build extra things. Similarly, what we have with WordPress and plugins. And I would welcome any other opinions about that session. I don't think I can answer that because these are front end would be Micropub, which has front end. All the rest of the services are service endpoints, so backend mostly.
Location.
So I'll talk about it. Attendance in the location group was initially 2, with a third joining subsequently. There was discussion of all of the elements of location and a brief discussion of what might be done with location. And there was one conclusion that I came to, which is there's no easy way to do it without getting a whole bunch of API keys. Because nobody wants to share their data for free unless you have 200 gigabytes of free storage space to store all of that data. And I'm sure you would have a lot of opinions on that you may save for another time, as somebody who was involved in that space for a long time.
Great. Last session, my format for contract.
Thanks. Well, we could also call it indie web commerce or be your own bookkeeper. We thought about ways to have a markup, microformat markup for commerce transaction or for contracts, so that you could, for example, easily track your own expenses, the duration of contracts running, I don't know, mobile contracts, insurance contracts. We had some ideas for the technical implementation, but one thing we thought about and questioned and didn't have an answer for is how do we actually get this information from existing providers? Is it hard maybe to get an API endpoint from these providers? How do we deal with that?
That was great. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
So we have photos already posted from today. Thanks to Jules. Yay! But what that also means is you should take a look. And so this is our group photo. I think everyone looks wonderful. The photos that Jules took while we were all busy working away and debating in our sessions are all on Flickr.
I was going to stay for a while.
Are you a paying customer?
But this is a call to, this is a heads up, look through these. If you see any that have you in them that for any reason you don't like, you can ask to be taken down, and it's not a problem. So I just wanted to make clear that that is totally something that's okay, and just mention it to Jules, and she'll take care of it. So, in the spirit of all the photo policy and stuff we talked about.
Great.
Any questions?
Do you want to intro it too?
What's the licensing of these photos?
Third from the top.
Oh, I wanted to use one of these.
Yeah. It's the standard one I always use. I don't even know.
Attribution non-commercial share like
It's a third from the top.
Is that like in the list of licenses you pick? I see. Okay. Anyway, I think that there's some amazing pictures here with people being very expressive. So.
I just like that picture of the pen next to the IndieWebCamp sticker.
Yeah, there's a lot of like. I think it looks great.
It's a thoughtful look.
Yeah. All right. So for tomorrow, we are restarting at 10 a.m. So our organizers will be here a little bit before then, just to make sure we're all set up.
7:30.
I think we'll probably be here by like 9:30.
So for people who haven't been to one before, what tends to happen with day 2?
So in day 2, I don't know about you, but like my brain is full with like way too many things I want to build on my site. So this is your chance to sleep on it tonight, see what you wake up with tomorrow morning, inspiring you from all the different things you heard about today, and come in day 2 with an idea, maybe 2, of something you could quickly hack up and build on your website to make, to start using, ideally, for yourself that you were inspired to do.
What time are demos?
We start demos at, I think it's like 4.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how many hours.
So we start at 10. We are getting lunch tomorrow. It'll probably be pizza of some sort. Delivery. Let me or any of the other organizers know if you have any specific dietary preferences. We'll be by default getting like 50% vegetarian pizzas because people seem to eat vegetarian pizzas. If there's anything.
Submit suggestions for pizza toppings.
Yeah.
In terms of the time, 10 to before, what I tend to do on day 2 is have one thing I want to accomplish that's actually super doable and easy, so that I know that I'll be able to demo that, and then a tougher problem. Do the super easy thing first, and then work on the tougher thing. If I get the tougher thing done by demo time, great. If not, at least I've got a super easy thing.
I have a slightly different approach to that, which is I pick one easy thing, and then I pick one thing that's even easier.
I like it.
Then I can usually end up with at least one thing done.
Yeah, that's me too.
I think it's also useful to add that you feel free to approach anyone on day 2, I believe. If you have any questions to ask, they know they are an expert on it, and just want to get something going and you don't know where to start. It's also a reason for day 2.
Yeah, the best thing about it is that you're in a room with other people, and if you need to know something about specification or programming language or CMS, guaranteed there's somebody in the room who knows something about that and can help you out.
May have worked on it, may have even written the spec or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
They've written the book on it.
Busy. Yeah. Absolutely interrupt people.
Yep.
So we'll kick off tomorrow with a really quick intro round. So we introduce ourselves again and shout out your idea of what you're planning on working on. That'll be really quick, and then we'll just jump right in.
Yeah.
And
that you are not committed to that. You can change your mind midstream.
Absolutely, yeah.
You think you were going to do one.
Yep. And we won't do a session grid, but we will do, if you want to like say, I'm working on this thing, feel free to like talk to me about it, or let's get people to work together on this thing, put those up, find spaces to cluster around those ideas. But it's not going to be like every hour we switch what we're working on.
It's be much more like a totally chaotic, decentralized clusters of common ideas.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you want to come with like 4 things you want to work on, possibly, and put all 4 up, that's great, because you might find that one of those 4 has like a bunch of other people that want to work on that too, and you said, well, you know what, I'm going to pick that one because this is a chance to hack together with a bunch of peers. So.
Yep, and then demos at the end, and everybody will, again, share what they worked on. So.
Any questions? Do y'all have a good time today?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Then we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. bright and shiny.